When some people find quilting, they jump in with both feet, but only the very brave would decide to start a quilt show. Today's guest, Valerie Prideaux, did just that with the popular Quilts at the Creek show. And when she moved on from that, she started an online lecture series, and now she's become an author. And she's a talented quilter too, and she's going to tell us all about it. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Valerie Prideaux. Welcome, Valerie, to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I understand you're coming to us from Toronto. Do you live in the GTA, or are you just outside?
Yeah. I live in Etobicoke.
So you have been on the periphery of my quilting ever since I started. I'm just so happy you are able to come on the show today because you've always had such special quilts. I've always admired them. When did you come to quilting?
I've always been a really busy person. I always had sort of part-time stuff that I did that I enjoyed doing. I taught fitness classes for 7 or 8 years. I had a part-time knitting business, just a bunch of different things. Well, I knew somewhere in the future I had to retire, and I was like, what am I going to do? I had this part-time knitting business, and it was before digital cameras and photocopies. And so I used graph paper to color out the pattern, and that would be part of the pattern. I had a photo I had to attach, and I sold them at craft shows and stuff. It was so much work. Like for someone to do this part-time, and I didn't have a car. So I'd have to borrow someone's car to go to some craft fair to show my stuff. I was getting tired of that. There was a quilt shop opening near us, and I went in and they were just setting it up. And so I just thought, oh, this is amazing. Look at the fabric. So I actually went online and I sold all of my yarn on eBay, and it cleared a lot of space for to start collecting fabric. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I'm not good technically. I'm clumsy with my fingers, and my points don't always match. I mean, I'm getting better, but still, it's not my strong point. But I've always loved color. So yeah, that was the big draw for me. So that's what I started. And I jumped in right away to Quilts at the Creek. Within a year of starting, I went to visit my sister, and there was a quilt show, Heritage Park in Calgary. I think it had been running for 18 years at that point. Oh, it was outside. All the local quilt guilds, that's their show. They all put their quilts in there rather than having separate shows. So coming home on the plane, just, thinking, I thought, well, this is so gorgeous. And we're a big city, and we had Black Creek Pioneer Village. So I phoned them. The person who answered the phone, luckily, was the right person. I realize that now. It's luck, right? We set up an appointment, and I brought one quilt with me, and we hung it up. And it was a weekday, so the park wasn't busy, but everyone in the park came to look at this quilt hanging there. It was so beautiful. So right away, they were like, okay, this is going to work. So they really helped me too. It was really a small group of people who worked with me to do this. So if I was going to quilt, I wanted people other than quilters to see quilts as well. And that was a good venue, right? Like about 3/4 of the people who came to the show are quilters, but 1/4 of them weren't, right? So they just stumbled it. Once there was a wedding there, and the people said, well, we want those quilts in the background. Another time, a wedding group said, can we take those down? So yeah, no. So it sort of all went together in my mind.
So starting a quilt show, that is not something that people do randomly. There's so much work and so much effort involved in starting a quilt show. Was it financially a good thing?
No. That was no. I'm not good at planning things long term. I really did it because I wanted the world to see quilts, and I realize now I should have. I didn't try to monetize it at all, and I should have, because then I might have still kept it going. I had run a science meeting for, 15, 17 years. It was really popular, and I really, I learned how to do it. I had vendors. It wasn't unlike a quilt show, really. We had poster boards rather than hanging the quilts. People hung their posters up. I wasn't afraid of starting that, and there's no money outlay for me, right? It was, the two things went together. I must say, though, one thing that happened was after we had a little bit of a surplus of money from that show, we decided, well, let's splurge and have one big last great meeting. And when we told all of the participants at this science meeting, it was the last year, they were so upset. Like, they really had loved the show, coming to Toronto, and a group of scientists from Montreal said, "Oh, we'd love to take it over." But, they didn't have my enthusiasm. And actually, that sort of feeds into Black Creek because I realized like the next year that show was finished, really. A few people went, it was a disaster. So that's why I ended Quilts at the Creek the way I did. Like, I did look for people to take it over from me, but it was my vision, and you would need someone as committed as me to do it because it's a lot of work. I was really happy to end it the way it did because, first of all, the next year was COVID, but also people have a really happy memory of that show, right?
Was it work 365 days of the year, or was it just a couple of months of really intensive work?
Well, you're always promoting it, right? We went to Quilt Guild to promote it. We'd have like a booth at Black Creek at some other time to tell people we did this, sending out emails, making posters and sending them to quilt stores, and always trying new things. Very quickly, we added speakers and workshops. Most of those kinds of things other people did. Like Sandy Lindahl it was her idea to do workshops. So she kind of drove that for a while. Shirley Dawson ran the vendor area where, quilters could sell their stuff. So I did all of the online stuff and a lot of the promotional stuff. But like Jane Kramer organized all of the volunteers and schedules and stuff. And I'm not good at that. So it was a few people, really committed people who enjoyed doing it, right? It was a fun show, right?
Well, it was a colorful location and the quilts had context within the location. I thought it was lovely. Every time I walked that show, I was going, oh my God, this must take a ton of volunteers to make it happen.
Mostly for hanging the quilt. And in fact, not even that many, because the very last weekend that we had it on the Sunday morning, we didn't have any volunteers to help hang. So it was just, we organized it. So there were like 4 or 5 of us. But, we got the 300 quilts up in a couple of hours. We always had lots of volunteers for takedown on Sunday because then people were there anyway to pick up their quilts.
So before you did quilting, what did you do?
I think I touched on a few things. I taught fitness for a long time. It was a big passion of mine, and I wish I could get myself up to that level of commitment again. And the knitting business.
But in your day job, what did you do?
I worked in science. I worked in research. I worked at Princess Margaret Hospital in the research labs there. And then we moved to Mount Sinai Hospital for I think 20 years. I worked in science for 50 years exactly. I graduated from high school and I was looking for something. I couldn't afford to go to university. So I went to university at night and I got a job in a clinical lab doing blood tests. And it was kind of fun because it was the old kind. It wasn't pushing a button on a machine. It was like mixing this and reading that. It was a lot of fun, but I hated taking blood. I wasn't good at it. So I thought, and I found a job in research. So I just kept going. I went to university at night for 12 years, but I enjoyed it. Wasn't just that that's what I needed to do. I really enjoyed going to school at night and learning new things and stuff. In fact, I always wondered, what do other people do at night? They're not there thinking about the essay that they're writing or.
So you have a blog, Cozy, Funky, Cool. And on that, you have sort of a sub thread about, do you want a career in quilting?
Right.
Where did that come from?
I finished writing the book and everything was done by January, 8 or 9 months ago. And I needed something to do. And I know so many people like you, you have a fantastic career that you've built from nothing, right? And so all of these other people, there are these great niche things that people can do in quilting. And I just thought there's probably other people out there who would find this interesting. So I do occasionally get emails from people saying, wow, or I know that person, or it's ending shortly. The last one's going to be me in my book. Because now that the book's out, there's a lot of other things to do. You always think, well, you just sit and wait, but no.
So I remember you coming to me. You were actively making quilts for your book, the Tumbler quilts. Where did the idea come from? Just one shape, endless possibilities.
I know, it's a great name. Before we started this, I was thinking, well, did I always I never thought about being an author at all. Like, I think when I was a kid, I tried writing a novel and it was a disaster. And I realized, no, this is not for me. I'll just read books. I won't write them. Years ago, I entered a knitting contest. There's a picture behind me in the back there. It was published in this, it got into the book. So I guess I already am a published author. Jane Shirley and I went to Higglett. Well, she was having a show in St. Mary's, and we took quilts down from to promote Quilts at the Creek. And one of them, Jane said to me, I've never seen that quilt before. It was a tumbler quilt. In fact, it's the one that's on the cover of the book. And she said, I've never seen that quilt before. I remember saying that would be a great book. But I didn't really think it, it just came out. And I never thought about it again as a book. And then I had made a quilt for my grandchildren using tumblers as sort of a road and stuff. And I sold that pattern. A lot of people bought some of it. I put kits together and people liked it. In fact, my granddaughters never got that quilt. I took pictures of them on it, but I still have it. They're drowning in quilts, honestly. They don't need to feel bad that they didn't get that one. It's still here.
The young woman that's in the picture, is that your
Yes,
granddaughter?
Yes.
So she's actually touched the quilt.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's a second granddaughter now, and I tried to get pictures of her on that quilt, but she, just couldn't get her to. She was too young and wasn't interested in having her picture taken. I don't know how that first one that I made started, but I made one and I really liked it, and it was sort of monochromatic, and I started playing with the shapes and stuff. And so luckily Sandy Lindahl lives near me, and she has a long arm. And I guess over COVID we became even closer because she started quilting these quilts for me. If I had to quilt them myself, there wouldn't be a book. And she was also very enthusiastic, like, this is a great idea, Valerie, you got to keep going, right? So it's nice to have that kind of push. So I made a number, and then I made a few more, and suddenly I'd made 27 quilts.
Well, I remember you and I meeting, I think probably the beginning of 2021, or maybe it was 2022. And you were just so excited about making these tumbler blocks. And I was thinking to myself, really?
Oh, sounds boring.
I've always thought you such a talented quilter. And I'm thinking, how is tumbling blocks keeping her interested? Yeah. But now that I've had a chance to read your book and where you've gone in your discoveries, I want to make a tumbler block quilt.
I'm really all about color, Before I got the book contract and I wasn't allowed to talk about this stuff for a while, I gave a talk to a couple of Quilt Guild talks about making tumbler blocks. And then I recently gave another one out at Grimsby, and the talk is quite different now. One of the women there said, I heard your first talk and it was all about the shape. And she said, now your talk is all about color. And it's true, once you see the same quilt made lots of different ways and changing, all of those elements of color. She was right. And it really resonated with me.
I'm recognizing a couple of pieces of fabric in this quilt. Oh,
yes,
so
I know.
And they're such good examples of, like, I love this blue and yellow one, because I'm always telling people, just because you have two colors in your quilt doesn't mean that they get equal show. Yes. You use one to accent the other.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the hardest parts was the publisher wants really high quality photos. And I have lights with the right lights and everything. And, I tried and tried and tried. And no matter how good I was, they weren't publication quality photos. I didn't know what to do, really. And then I remembered a friend of my husband, he was an engineer, but he had a part-time photography business. He did wedding photography for a while, but I think like all the bridezillas. And he said also it's really nerve-wracking that if you ruin the photos, people are not going to get married again to take those photos. So I asked him, and he didn't sound very enthusiastic, but he came over and he took a couple of pictures and he said, oh no, this is fine. This is kind of fun. I really just put double-sided tape up on my dining room wall and stuck them up. that way they kept them really flat. The publisher said they would pay the photographer. So he gave them a quote. They said most photographers, sort of from an arts background, they're not very organized. And Bernard has this engineering background. He's very organized, right? So they were thrilled with him as a photographer. And they said if they ever have anyone else in our neck of the woods that needs photos, they're going to send them to him because he was so good. So he just came. It was one day, probably a full 9 to 5. But at the end of the day, he said, I want this quilt. So that blue and yellow one. So that's now over his sofa at home.
Let's just go over, if somebody was wanting to write a book, what do you think the first steps are?
I was recently rereading the rules about the questionnaire you have to fill out. And it used to be you had an idea and you submitted, you didn't have to have made the quilt. So you needed a couple of sketches and the idea, maybe one quilt, but now I see they want every single quilt sort of a sketch or an idea. So I think they're getting tighter. Someone told me that they had submitted to a huge number of quilt book publishers. They got rejected by them all. So I thought, well, I'll just start at the top. So I wrote to C&T Publishing, and honestly, I think it was either the next day or the day after that, and they said yes. I was like, what? Now what? But I had already made all of the quilts. I had put all the photos on Flickr for them so they could see all of the quilts. Because if you read their questionnaire, they want to know how many followers you have on Twitter and TikTok and this and that, and how many books have you published? Do you teach classes? So I didn't have any of that really, but I think it was the quilts that sold them. And I realized I'm very lucky because, so I had to submit the first third of the book 6 months after we started. We had a few interviews in between that helped me figure out how to structure the book and what I needed, some gaps I needed to fill to make it a nice story for me. But really, I can't imagine the pressure of having to make, like most quilt books, I think have 12 quilts. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine the pressure of designing and making and finishing 12 quilts and writing the instructions and like the chapter on color and fabric and stuff. Like that's a lot of work to think about it and stuff. So yeah, even with the quilts made, I did get the first third done by June and the second third done by August, and then it was finished by October, I think, beginning of October. So I can't imagine, but yes, that's how you do it. You submit this idea, you wait and hear back, and then they slot you into their schedule. Like you have an editor, you work together shaping it up, and then you have to have another interview with the whole publication team, but they all have to okay the idea, right? I even said to the editor that when we were talking once and she was talking about, it's not approved yet. And I'm like, well, is there a chance you're going to say no? And she said, no, not with your book. Because I was, then what do I do, right? I really appreciated the editor. She really helped me. I mean, we only had, 1 hour talks here and there, but it really helped me think about how I needed to shape it and what worked for me and that kind of thing. It was a really interesting process. And I really also valued the technical editor who goes through and checks all the yardage and yeah. And also the editor suggested that honestly, putting tumbler quilts together, once you're putting one set of tumblers together, they're all the same. So in fact, I'd written it all out separately for each pattern. And then when we were in the discussion, she said, well, maybe we can put it all together and then just refer to that part, right? And that really made it a lot simpler for me.
So once the book was published, what are your commitments now? Now you're out promoting it.
I had a lot of pre-publication things I had to do. I had to do a couple of videos, like an interview video where I talked about it. And I think it's for quilt shops who are interested in buying the book. I had to put a class plan together. I took over their Instagram page for a day, C&T Publishing. Like I learned to use Canva, where you make videos. Oh, I love it. It's so much fun. This is not much of a learning curve, a little bit, but, and I realized it didn't have to be me talking in a video because I'm not, I'm sort of an introvert. I don't, I'm quite happy to be in the background playing with stuff. And so I made those videos and they're so much fun. I mean, on Instagram, I don't think the videos just come and go, right? They don't just sit there So I don't think that many people saw them, but like they were still fun to make. I don't care if anyone sees them. I had fun making them. Also, in the book, did you notice how the photos, the quilts are styled? They're all on walls, and that was my idea.
I saw that they were all on walls.
So what happened was when I briefly ran, I think for a year, Quilt Talk. We had Brigitte Heitman from
Zen Chic.
yeah, Zen Chic. Yeah. So we had her on, and at the end, I said to her, your photos are so beautifully styled. Like she had one with a rocking horse in front of her quilt, or a bicycle, or this or that. And I said, like, do you have all those props in your house? And she said, oh, no. There are places you can go and you just, plop your quilt into the background. I think it's called Canvy. Anyway, I said to the publisher, I don't want my quilts thrown on beds or, hanging off a table or something. Like I said, I really want them styled so that they look like art, because in fact, they're beautiful.
You've brought them all to life, and your use of color is phenomenal.
Yeah. My husband's sister is an artist, and she said, I forget, I made some offhand comment. She said, well, of course, Valerie, you're a colorist. And what? So then I looked it up, and yeah, I mean, color is the most important thing to me. It just is.
So do you find it contradictory that you ended up in research then, since you're such a color person and research is all about black and white and gray?
No, not in research. No, research is about trying new things all the time. New machinery, new techniques. Like, I went back to school and took a few more courses when we started working with DNA, recombinant DNA and stuff, to learn all about that. So no, it's always new things. There's a lot of downsides. Like when something doesn't work and you work on it for 6 months, going in there, forcing yourself to try something new to get this stupid experiment to work. That's when it's frustrating. But it really is about always trying new things. It was the right career for me, actually. I really enjoyed that part of it. And also I ended up being a single parent. So the hours are much more flexible than working, like if I was a nurse or something, I could take my son to violin lessons at lunchtime.
Have you passed on your love of color and quilting to any of your siblings or your son or your grandchildren?
Well, my sister is a quilter. In fact, we just made a quilt together where I did the piecing, and she has a long arm right now. She's going to be selling it soon, so I had to get it off to her. We're giving it to my niece as a Christmas present. And she was real. I used to see her fabric, and I'd be like, "What? What are you doing with that?" She used to do hand sewing, and that's not my thing. Although, like, I've suddenly become obsessed with embroidery, so who knows? My granddaughter, I think, has a real love of color. Like during COVID lockdown, I had to go to the quilt shop that's near you. So I took her on the subway and the bus, and we went in there, and I said to her, what's your favorite color? I'll take a picture in front of that color. And she said, green. Like, what 3 or 4-year-old loves green, Her favorite colors at the time were green and orange, and now green and orange and purple. Like, and she's done some pretty things that I think could be art, like beautiful stuff. So
Green, orange, and purple. That's
I
that
know.
second triadic, but it's the one with the low contrast.
And she picked up some green fabric that I made a little doll quilt for her with it, So yeah, when she saw the book, she was like, oh, right. So that was pretty, yeah.
You've also done a podcast briefly during COVID called Quilt Talk. How often do you have to say no to things?
Well, no one, these are things that pop into my head that I become obsessed with. So like that, actually, I thought about it. There weren't many people doing Zoom quilt talks then. I hadn't seen many. And so the idea came to me, and it was like, 10 o'clock at night. So I texted Sandy Lindahl, and I said, what do you think of this idea? Oh, love it. Let's go. And again, it's not like there's a huge outlay of money or anything, and I do have, a big email list that I try not to abuse. That was so much fun. Like, I really tried to get people that, I didn't want local people that you could see that Quilt Guilds had. And so it was really fun, like Australia, and Brigitte was in Germany, and just people from all over. It was fun. Like,
So have you noticed a change in your color palette since you've been quilting? Or do you go through seasons with color, or?
it's just an obsession. No, if I open a box of, like, I do have my fabrics sorted by color. I think most people do. But as soon as I open a box, I'm like, oh, look at that. That's how all those monochromatic quilts came about. Like, oh, look at this orange next to that orange. Wow, this is nice. This would go with it too. And so, you start cutting some blocks and putting them on the wall. I mean, I think the most important thing is that design wall, right? Like,
I cannot believe the difference in my enjoyment having a vertical full design wall. I used
yeah,
to put it on my bed. I used to have a flannel back
yeah,
tablecloth that went up
right.
occasionally, but having one that's just stationary that I can pin up anytime I want. Sometimes I've got 3 different ideas working, but it just fuels the brain.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And actually, mine's on the basement and on the wall. And as you come down the stairs, you see it. So like it's nice, like the quilt I'm working on right now, which is like it's so exciting when you're working on a project and you think, oh, it's gorgeous. And as I come down the stairs, I was like, yes, like, and I often take pictures of them because you get more of a sense of what it's going to look like than just standing there right up against it.
Yeah, it's strange how a photo,
Yeah.
like if I'm struggling, I'll always take a photo and it gives me clarity for some reason.
The other thing I've noticed is that sometimes, especially in sort of the last quilts in my book, if you put those blocks together, you might think, well, I don't know that they really go. But once they're pieced together, that helps bring things closer together, like physically, but also the design and the color. I think that's a really important part of my quilts.
So tell me about the quilt behind you. Actually, you've got quilts behind you.
One is a self-portrait that I did a few years ago when my hair used to be short. That was, actually that's one of the joys of having COVID. I would never have grown my hair this long, ever. Ever. Like, and I love it. Like, well, first of all, I colored my hair forever. So who knew I had this beautiful white hair? I've had people stop me and say, how often do you have to color your hair? Like, the other one it's actually a tumbler quilt. I tilted up a bit.
All
Yeah.
right.
So again, I was just playing with tumblers. I saw all those purples and I thought they went together and I thought, oh, what would I do with that? So that's how that came from. The green one is in the book. This one is in the book. Yeah, this is beautiful. I love this quilt. It went to Houston, the quilt market for the C&T booth, but
yeah,
I was going to go, but they didn't think my book would be out in time, and it turned out it was. So that was too bad. But I love this quilt. When people see it in a photo, it doesn't look as stunning as it is in person. I think the book does it justice, though.
I think that's true of every quilt. They're just so spectacular in person. If people want to get a copy of your book, where do they get a hold of it?
It's in almost all bookstores, Amazon and Chapters, and I sell it on my website.
So are you doing any workshops or lectures
Right now I'm getting Zoom talks. I'm booking those. I'm working on a workshop. I think it'll be a Zoom workshop. Doing a Zoom talk, you can show the process of something. You can show all of the quilts. You can go into Photoshop and change colors and show people all those variations and stuff. So in many ways, I think people get more out of the Zoom talk,
And if people want to contact you directly, maybe ask you a question or book a lecture, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, it's all on my website blog, cozyfunkycool.com.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. You've been a wonderful guest.
It's been great. I've enjoyed chatting with you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Valerie Prideaux. She has definitely made me think about single block quilts differently. If you would like your own copy of Tumbler Quilts, I'll leave a link in the video notes below. If you would like to contact Valerie for a trunk show, workshop, or lecture, I'll leave a link to her website, Cozy Funky Cool, as well as her social media links too. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing, interesting people on this show. let one inspire you. And if you missed my declutter challenge, don't forget to check out that playlist too. Take care, and I'll see you next time.